Hello and welcome to a new episode of Other Record Labels. I'm your host, Scott Orr, and welcome to another special episode of our series, Industry Insiders, where we take a break from talking with independent record labels and instead we talk with people in the music industry that on subjects that pertain to independent record labels. And today, by request from some members of our audience, we're talking about college radio, and I have Shil Patel on the show today, and he's from Tiger Bomb Promo, and we get all into the subject of college radio and why it still matters for independent record labels and for independent artists, and how we can go about pitching our releases to college radio. Before we get into that, I want to talk to you about something extremely exciting. Today, with this episode, we are celebrating 3 years of the podcast. That's right. This week is our third birthday. And listen, 109 episodes. That is incredible. Almost 1,000 members on our Facebook community and over 100,000 downloads of the podcast. My mind is blown. Thank you so much to everyone who has listened, who has joined our Facebook community, who has visited our website, who have sent me emails, which you can do. You can email me podcast@otherrecordlabels.com. I love hearing from you. People who have shared this with other folks on Twitter, who have included it in articles, on websites. It's just been an incredible 3 years. Thank you so much to all the labels and industry folk who have been a part of it. And of course, thank you to the dedicated listeners. I honestly, this is the most fun I've ever had in my career, and I'm not stopping by any means. So thank you so much. I really hope that you enjoyed today's episode. Also, make sure you visit our website where we have our resources for independent record labels, like our record label toolkit, which is a free download, and our free guide, which is a compilation of advice from the labels that we've had on the show in the past. So please enjoy today's Industry Insider episode where we talk about college radio, and thank you again for listening to the show. Well, let's roll into this. I'm excited to talk to you.
Okay, yeah.
I actually had a few people actually email me asking if we could do an episode on college radio, which is great, but it was also kind of surprising, like, because the streaming services take up so much of the conversation these days. It's nice to focus on traditional radio, and I was just kind of surprised that was a topic that our audience wanted. I want to ask you, why does college radio matter? Or maybe a better question is, how does college radio still matter, even on top of all of the ubiquity of streaming services?
Yeah, that's a question that, I get asked a lot. And it's also a question I've been involved in college radio in some way since like 2003, 2004. Wow. When I was first started, like as a DJ at a station, and
Wow.
then throughout the years, like working in the industry. So going to CMJ, which was the old college radio chart, and also a music festival in New York that was geared towards like a lot of the people attending the festival were from college radio and involved in radio in some way. Going to the panels at CMJ or other conferences.
Sure.
The conversation was always like, is radio still relevant? How are we going to adapt moving forward? And, is this a dying industry? And, I've had so many conversations with labels and management and others who are like, well, radio, does it really matter? And and the more that I think about it, I'm like, well, I've now been having this conversation for 18 years.
Yeah.
And
that's a good point.
Yeah, and radio hasn't gone away. There are a lot of challenges that I think radio stations have faced, especially campus and college radio stations here in the States. Primarily, just the idea of a lot of the campuses realizing at some point, oh, there's money tied up in this license that the university owns for the station. We can sell that license, the FCC license, to a broadcasting company, whether it's like a Christian broadcasting company or some other,
I see,
like kind of nonprofit. And so a lot of prominent college radio stations and campus radio stations, there was a period of time where a lot of them were closing down because their licenses were getting sold by the university to to some other, entity.
Oh.
So that was a fear for a while, and something that I think is legitimate. But in general, what I've noticed about radio, and this is, I think, to finally answer your question about why it's relevant. Uh, the term college radio is kind of a blanket term, and it's one that when I have calls with clients and management and people maybe who are new to the process, I kind of have to explain to them that it's like using the word, you know, Kleenex or something, or Xerox, when
Oh,
you're
right.
talking about, it's kind of just the term that's been applied to this group of stations that do primarily consist of campus and college radio stations, but also includes a lot of independent radio, community radio,
Mm.
um, and these days, online stations, and it's a kind of a broad umbrella, and that includes, some of those big stations that basically on every campaign people talk to me about, where we had the first call and they say, well, we really want to get played on KEXP, KCRW, WFUV in New York. Those are the stations that a lot of people are familiar with, and they fall under this umbrella of college radio. And they have a really good following. They have a strong listener base. KEXP, they have, I think, over 1 million subscribers on their YouTube channel,
Right.
and I think in the past year, so they went over 1 billion views on the videos that they produced, like the live videos they produced.
Oh, wow.
Which is, and at some point, I think maybe KEXP might be in some places better known for their video production than their
Right.
terrestrial
Yeah.
broadcasting rights.
Right.
So,
Oh, I
so
listen to them
that
like on Sunday mornings, like over all the way on the other side of the continent.
yeah, they have such a broad reach. I work with bands from all over the place. There's a band from Brazil that I work with, called Boogerins, and they, at one point, we had a conversation. Like, I promoted a record for them a few years ago. We booked them a KEXP in studio performance when they were in Seattle. The next record was coming out, and they said, like, we really, really want to get the KEXP session for our next tour. And I said, sure. And they kind of volunteered. They're like, in Brazil, like, that is how people discovered new
Wow.
music. KEXP,
Wow.
the live sessions. He's like, that's the pitchfork or whatever of Brazil when it comes to like discovering new artists. Like,
That's
KEXP
crazy.
is huge there.
That's
And,
insane that to get
so
to promote themselves in their hometown, they had to go to Seattle.
go to Seattle, yeah. So that is, obviously that level, that tier of radio station plays a big part into why a lot of people come to us for promotion, because they want to get that kind of coverage at those top tier stations. But there's also a big benefit, in my opinion, to a lot of the college stations and kind of in smaller markets, and in smaller universities, and like the idea of sending a record out to the group of contacts that we have at radio. You have the initial benefit of them listening and then playing it on air in hopes that maybe some of their listeners hear it and engage with the record, and maybe, write it down and say, I'm going to go back and check out more of this artist, or like add them to my Spotify playlists,
Yeah.
or that kind of thing, or buy a record, go to Bandcamp and buy a record. That's not necessarily going to happen, at every single station. If a station plays an artist that I'm working with,
Sure.
that level of engagement might not happen, but it is one of the things that could be a benefit, right? It's like one of the
Yeah.
immediate thing that we're looking for. But then beyond that, we are sending it to a group of these, programmers, music directors, DJs at these stations, who are really active in their music scene, who are
Interesting.
online talking about music all the time, making playlists for their friends, making playlists for their followers.
Right.
And a lot of the people that we talk to at these stations, they're not just music directors or DJs, they're also booking shows at venues. They're
Right.
writing for their local weekly, alt weekly.
Or they
They could be running
transition to another role years down the road or something.
right. Especially a lot of the younger music directors that
Mm-hmm.
I work with, they often go into the music industry, and yeah, like you said, they work at labels, booking agencies.
Yeah, that's a great point.
I work with so many people on a day to day or week to week basis who I met through college radio and their role as they were at the time a music director, and now they run a record label and they hire me to
Yeah.
promote their records, or so it's one of those intangible things that I often point to. It's like, if you're going to send your music out to a group of people, this is a really good one to get it out in front of, because they are among the most vocal.
Yeah, well,
And
that's a great point. Oh man, Shil, you answered about 5 or 6 of my questions in your opening monologue here. So thank you so much. But I want to
All right, well, it was
go.
great talking to you.
Yes, thanks a lot. I want to go back over them because that actually, there's a lot to unpack, but you've made a lot of great points there. Let's go back to the very beginning for a second here, and can you tell me what you do and a little bit of the origins of Tiger Bomb?
Yeah. I guess a little bit about myself. I grew up in Texas, and I went to the University of Texas at Dallas uh, for college.
Mm-hmm.
And I was a little bit older. My route in college was a little. I took the long path,
Okay.
so it took
Okay.
me a little longer to kind of finally focus on school and get and kind of get my head into the game when it came to like
Mm.
school. But so I was at UT Dallas. I think it started in 2003, and got involved with the radio station there. In its like first few months, I think the station was probably, I think about 4 or 6 months old, something like that. Somebody approached me and asked me, like, hey, you should consider being a DJ. And so I took them up on it, and uh, that was really, kind of eye opening to me, because I didn't really know how a radio station worked, and neither did anybody else really who was working at the station. We kind of knew that there's these roles that the University of Texas charter system has in place for radio
Mm.
stations. Like, you have a paid position for a program director, a general manager, but no one really quite understood what all of that meant. So everyone was trying to figure this out. It was an internet only radio station operating out of it used to be a TA's office, and it was just converted into a little studio. And so we were all learning, and there was a music director at the time. I was really interested in what he was doing, and kind of like basically kind of took his job in a way. I just
Okay.
kind of started doing what he was doing, and reaching out to record labels, and asking them to send us music. I said, we're a fledgling internet only radio station in Dallas, in a suburb of Dallas, but please, send me some music. And we slowly started making more and more connections. And Dallas Fort Worth is a strange place, because it's a huge, metropolitan area, but there's not a lot of choice when it comes to independent radio there. There's a community radio station that was relatively popular, but it was really eclectic programming. And then there's a station in Fort Worth at Texas Christian University, but if you lived in Dallas, you couldn't get the signal. Like, the signal kind of
Oh,
dropped
okay.
off. So there was this kind of void. And so in Dallas, we were this strange kind of entity where we were a new small station, but we were in Dallas, and that was a touring market, and
Mm.
a lot of bands came through. So I think a lot of the labels and promoters were interested in sending us stuff because we were new, and we were motivated. We were really active and talked a lot online. At that point, it was like MySpace,
Yeah. Right.
and blog. We had a blog spot account,
Nice.
uh, but we ended up, getting to the point where we were able to book interviews with artists and things like that who were coming through town, because we were one of the only radio options available. And that was really eye opening again, because then I started to realize like how much goes into the process of releasing an album and promoting a tour, that I just wasn't aware of as a casual fan of music before. I didn't really understand um, what goes into promoting all of that, and started to learn. I eventually got the role, the official position of music director, and that's when I really started to kind of piece it together, how things worked and how they fit. And that role as a music director at a college radio station, or at a radio station in general, you are the one who is basically all the new music that's coming in is directed to you, and then it's up to you to listen to it and determine whether or not that's something that you want to add into the music library, make it
Right.
available for your DJs. And you get hit up by people from record labels. You get hit up by promoters who have basically my job that I have now,
Yeah, right.
independent promoters, and then you get submissions from artists directly. So it's really you're kind of, everything is coming into you, and then you're the kind of bottleneck, I guess, in a way, that's in the way between the music landing at the desk and then getting into the library. So I was checking out, listening to new music all the time. We had weekly meetings where it'd be me and a couple of other people to sit down and listen to 20, 30, 40 albums at a time, and try to
Wow.
determine if we liked it, if we were
Yeah.
going to add it to the rotation or not. uh, that was really fun. And then, but because of that job, I got to go to the CMJ Music Festival that I mentioned before. I would go to South by Southwest representing the station, and just met so many people in the music industry, and talking about people from labels again, publicists, other promoters, people from other radio stations. That was a really valuable experience, meeting people from other stations, and
Oh, yeah,
learning
I
how they do
imagine.
things. So I was in the role of music director for a year and a half, and then I became station manager. Got promoted to station manager, and I took that role on for another year and a half. And that was also interesting, because the station manager role was more involved with making sure the station functioned on a day-to-day basis, and then kind of doing a lot of stuff more locally,
Okay.
which included like putting together shows on campus twice a year, or twice a semester. I think we got a budget for 2 shows a semester, or maybe it was 2 shows a year.
Oh, that's cool.
So like talking to bands from the area, trying to book them for the show with a
Yeah.
very limited budget.
Right.
So that was a fun kind of challenge to do, and I'd never booked shows before. I didn't know how that worked, and so um, that was a really good learning experience for me, to kind of figure out how that works, and how you promote a show, especially a show on a campus, again in like a suburban
Right.
part of Dallas. Is a really, really interesting. So as I was like finishing up school, I was uh, at that point just a DJ. I didn't have enough credit hours left to have official role at the station. You had to have, like, I think, take 12
Oh, I
credit
see.
hours a semester
Oh, that's,
to have
yeah.
a paid
Okay.
position. So I was just a DJ in that last like few months, and went to CMJ one last time, because our station got nominated for a CMJ College Radio Award, and
Oh,
I
no
really
way.
wanted to go up there in case we won. And the award was like best internet radio station, or best internet presence,
Oh,
and we got
nice.
beat by KEXP. How are we going to compete with KEXP?
Sure.
But it was still fun. And when I was up there, there was a promoter from a company who was leaving her job to move back. She was British and was moving back to London, and was basically said, like, I think you should apply for that job. I think you'd be great at it. And so I considered it, and then a month later, I was driving out to Athens, Georgia, for that job. So
Wow.
yeah, and that was a role at a company that did PR, or that does PR and radio promotion. And I took a role as radio promoter, because it was kind of the analogous job of like the music director at a station. It's kind of, you're on the other side of the phone, basically.
Right.
And that was in 2007. So I started there in 2007, and within a couple of years, I ended up becoming like the head of the promotion department. So I was in charge of coordinating the schedule, and I did a lot of the booking, like bringing on new artists onto the roster that we would promote.
Okay.
And I, over that course of time, put together a lot of events like at South by Southwest and C&J. I was booking a lot of the showcases there and
That must have been
making a
really
lot of
helpful.
connections.
That must have been really helpful, your previous experience as a music director and a station manager, and now you're pitching to those people. I mean, you must have just really had a better idea how to communicate to them.
Yeah, and it just that having that barrier eliminated where it was we'd met in person and we had, had, like conversations about things that weren't music related.
Sure.
Like I started to get to know a lot of people, just as friends. And there's always that fine line in the music industry between people who are friends and people who are work, associates, professional associates. And there's obviously a lot of blurring of those lines, but I think, I had the kind of personality that I think like when we were hanging out at South by Southwest, we were having a fun time. And like, I think that was like, I was able to kind of like let people know, like my energy was, positive and I just wanted to like see good music and share good music and talk about that with other people. And that was really my only motivation, because it wasn't to make a lot of money. That was for sure. So,
so was the promo company Tiger Bomb, or how did that evolve?
No, so I worked at that company. It's called Team Claremont, and I worked there until 2016. So almost 10 years. It was a little shy of 10 years.
Wow.
And while I was there, like I said, ended up just learning, taking on so many different roles. And near the end of 2016, there was, I don't know how much I should get into it, but there was basically an event that happened where the owners of the company, one of the owners of the company, did something that made me and the rest of the staff pretty uncomfortable. And and I ended up leaving the company, and so did the other people that were working there at the time. And during that process, I was like, what do I do next? And the only thing I really know how to do is this at this point. So my focus kind of turned towards, well, let me start my own company and do things the way that I want to do them, meaning from top down. What the aesthetics of the company, you could be in control of that. The artists that we work with, just how we present ourselves, down to little things like what software do I want to use, and how do I want to keep track of things, kind of the details of running radio promotion campaigns.
Yeah.
So that was a September 30th, 2016. I launched Tiger Bomb with an initial artist roster of artists, and grew from there.
Wow.
And I was just looking yesterday, just out of curiosity, and we're close to, I think, 400 or 500. I think it's 500 different artists and campaigns that we've run over the course of the 4.5 or so
That's
years
incredible.
We've been in company.
So when a label, let me ask you about when a label or like a self-managed artist is working their album and getting ready to promote their album. A lot of them are debating whether they can afford to hire a publicist. How does it, what's the thought process between hiring a publicist and then hiring what you do? Are they completely separate? Do publicists overlap into your territory or vice versa?
There is overlap when it comes to, so the overlap comes in places like, say, for example, NPR's All Songs Considered.
Sure.
Or a show on KCRW like Morning Becomes Eclectic, for example.
Yes, right.
There are these kind of the things that cross over, I think, are what are considered shows that are considered to have editorial content.
Okay.
A lot of times the publicist will want to kind of be in charge of pitching things where there is a little bit more of a editorial aspect to it.
I see.
So if an artist that we're working with has a publicist on board, a lot of times the first one of the first conversations I had with that publicist is like, are you pitching Bob Boylan and Robin Hilton at
Right.
NPR? Are
Right.
you, if there was a tour happening, I would say like, are you reaching out to Morning Becomes Eclectic or this show or that dialogue is important to have. And most of the time when I work with a publicist, uh, we have, I know so many publicists from over the years, so we have this kind of like understanding that let's kind of figure out the parameters of how this is going to work from the outset, so that we're not stepping on each other's toes.
Interesting. Yeah.
But in general, that's kind of where the crossover. There are a lot of publicists that have radio stations on their contact lists, but I don't know if any of them are doing like a proper radio campaign
Right.
like we would.
No, yeah.
So I think
Sure.
I think for the most part, what we're adding to it is structuring it and doing it in the way that like radio stations expect to receive new music.
I see. Yeah.
And the publicists might just like have them on their email list, and the stations get press releases as those are coming out, but they might not give the stations any specific instructions on like, here's the ad date at radio, or here's the FCC information.
Right. And from what I remember, like there's like these kind of anal requirements that they request. Like I know our local station, they don't want singles. And when you send them an album, you send them the MP3s and they're tagged and they want the track list typed up for you and all this stuff just to make their ingestion process easier.
Yeah. And that's much more important now than ever. Cause one thing that we're doing currently, and probably, I don't know when this is going to air, but probably by the time it airs, we'll have announced that we're moving towards doing everything digitally. It's been a long time coming, and the last year through working on records through the pandemic made me realize we just need to do things. We need to rethink the way we do a lot of things.
Right.
And the first one, I think, is this idea of having to mail out hundreds of CDs on every campaign. Just
right.
Didn't make sense anymore. But
well, and is it?
But yeah,
go ahead.
I was just gonna say, going back to that question about the hiring a publicist versus or hiring a radio promoter. What we often do is so connected to what a publicist is doing, because for the radio side of things, I'm looking at the timeline that I get from a label or from management or from an artist, and that's going to include when the album is announced, when nowadays I also get a clear map of when singles are going to be released. That used to not really be available on every campaign, but now I think because of making sure that you're getting everything up on DSPs.
Yeah.
Everybody knows which singles are going to go up on which dates. So I have all that whole timeline laid out in front of me, and so much of that is kind of set up with the publicist.
I see.
First, and then we come in and say, okay, yeah, I like everything that I see here. Here's how we're going to integrate the radio campaign into this timeline you already have that exists, and move forward from there. And I think if you look at our social media, you'll see like we share press all the time. So we really rely on I think having those things to share with stations that we work with to give the artists that we work with some sense of credibility and to give them more to work with.
I want to ask you about pitching, and you've talked about moving to digital. I think the fear with digital is that it's so much easier to get lost, and the barrier for entry is gone for everyone. Whereas I would assume, even though it's far more costly, I would assume that sending a 12-inch record to a radio station would have a greater chance of getting heard or looked at versus an email. Is there any truth to that?
There have been people that I've worked with over the years who've wanted to just send out 200, vinyl copies of their album to stations. I've talked them out of it because it's a very expensive.
Oh, sure.
Process. And I think that what I want to take away from this past year, especially, and what I started when I started Tiger Bomb, what I started to try to do is make sure that we're not just throwing things at the wall,
Yeah.
and seeing what
Yes.
sticks. That the amount of waste that goes into doing things like that, I think, it doesn't do anybody any good, and I think it can feel soothing to say, okay, well, we sent out 200 copies on vinyl, and you kind of daydream that DJs are ripping it open and they're putting it on these like actually functioning turntables
Right.
in college radio stations. When in reality, I think a lot of the DJs that we're that are going to would have access to that record don't have the time to go to the vinyl shelf. They're putting their playlists together, sometimes on Bandcamp and YouTube,
Right.
uh, and plugging their laptop into the board and playing it from that. Uh, and I've talked to so many stations who say like, oh yeah, our turntables don't work. Somebody stole the cart. Somebody stole the
Yeah.
cartridge. Like 3 months ago, and we haven't
Right.
replaced it. Like,
Right.
so the vinyl, when we do send out vinyl to stations, it's kind of like a thank you gift, or a kind of
Okay.
what you
Yeah.
mentioned. What you mentioned also is like a boost to maybe give it a little bit more of a boost, where somebody does see it sitting on their desk and they're like, oh, I need to check this out. And I don't expect them to actually open the vinyl and
But they'll
review
check out the
record
MP3
that
you
way.
sent earlier.
Yeah, they
I
might
see.
check out the SoundCloud link or
I
whatever.
see.
So,
Okay. Oh, that makes sense. When you pitch to radio, do you target stations based on the genre of the artist you're working with? Is it pretty specific?
yeah, so there's kind of with what we do, and I think in general, it's kind of how a lot of PR is done as well. There is the passive pitch that we have, the passive approach.
Okay.
And then we have the direct kind of targeted approach. So the direct approach is us, like you said, individually contacting a station, knowing what that station tends to like and program. And sometimes it comes down to the music director themselves and their taste. And then sometimes it's actually looking at the station overall and seeing that, okay, the station plays much more Americana and roots music, so I'm not going to pitch them so hard on this like electronic record that I'm
Right.
working.
Yeah.
Or just knowing a DJ, like, this DJ really likes jangly guitars, and this record is full of jangly guitar. I'm going to send it their way. So like that definitely happens, and I try to make those pitches as personalized as I can, or try to let people know. Sometimes I'm even sending something to a music director with trying to be as transparent as possible, telling them, I don't know if this is something that you'll necessarily like, but I think you should listen to it because I see the station's chart or your playlist, and I think this would fit within that. So I might know a music director's personal taste doesn't line up with this, but the rest of their station does. And I think a good music director knows that too, that their taste doesn't necessarily have to be the way the station sounds.
That actually got me thinking about a question that I've seen in our community, in our Facebook group, amongst other labels, when we're talking about publicists and whether or not we should hire a publicist. There's this fear that if we reach out to a publicist and we're willing to pay $2,000 or $1,000 or $5,000, that any publicist is going to say yes and take us on, even if they deep down know there's no hope of this record succeeding. And I'm kind of curious, like, how do you overcome that? I mean, how do you, in your business, say, we want to attract clients, we want to work with artists. Music is so subjective, so there could be people who will love this track or this record, but at the same time, it's better for your company to have these artists be successful under you. How do you balance that, and how do you know? Do you go back to an artist and say, sorry, the DJs we work with are not going to like this. We're not going to represent this record. Like how do you work within that?
Yeah, I do end up passing on a lot of records in the course of a year, and it's hard. It's a hard thing to do.
That's good to hear, though.
I know how much, work and how much love goes into a lot of the music that I pass on. And it's really difficult to tell somebody, hey, I don't think that this is going to be a good fit. And typically what I try to let them know is that it's not because you've made a terrible record. It's because the types of radio stations that I work with might not play something that sounds like this because it could be more effective at a country radio station
I see.
or adult contemporary. Like there are times where I hear something, I'm like, that's good, but like college radio is probably not going to play this.
I see.
There are also times I hear something that's good, but it's one, it could be like one track and it's 49 minutes long and it's Tuvan throat singing, and you're like, this is cool, but how effective is my radio campaign going to be?
Yeah.
You might pick up WFMU and a couple of other stations. Like is that going to be worth spending the money on it? So I try to listen to things when somebody, especially when we get a submission, just like from somebody comes to the website or finds like an article. There's like a KEXP article about doing radio promotion that a lot of people read, and then we're listed as one of the companies that KEXP recommends if you're going to hire somebody. So for example, like if somebody comes to us from that article and I listen to their music, I try to listen to it from the perspective of me sitting at the desk at a station as a music, like in my role as a music director.
Right, which you were. Yeah, that's smart.
Yeah. And trying to think about my DJs and what they would go for. So, I think that putting myself in that position instead of a person that runs a company that needs to pay rent.
Yeah.
That shouldn't be the consideration when we're adding stuff to our roster. It should be, will our efforts for doing radio promotion for this artist get them played at stations? Will it get stations engaged in this record?
Mm-hmm.
And that's how I have to approach it. And I think that's one of the reasons why I've been able to keep doing this for so long without feeling like a total fraud. I try to make sure that we are taking on things that I feel have merit. And I also, on the flip side of that, when I promote something to a station, I don't want to misrepresent that artist, and I don't want to present it in a way that makes me seem disingenuous. So, I when I was a music director, I remember getting calls, emails from people saying, every week they were like, "This is my favorite album of the year. This is the best song of the year." And after a while, like that pitch doesn't work anymore.
Yeah.
It's just like, okay, could you just be honest with me and tell me why I should play this, why you think I should play it? And if it is your favorite album of the year, that's great. But maybe if that was the case, I might hear that once a year, twice a year, not every week.
Not in the first week of January.
Yeah. So myself and Tori Bennis works alongside me at Tiger Bomb as well, like the other full-time person. And we both have I think we both come from the same place where we want to make sure that we are being genuine with how we approach it. And Tori will be, she's a huge Sufjan Stevens fan. And when we promote the Sufjan Stevens record, she lets people know, like, I love this record, like she's shouting it from the rooftops.
Yeah.
And that's great. That's awesome, because it's completely genuine. And that's how it should be, I think.
Yeah. So you had mentioned when we were first talking about other forms of radio outside of college radio, and that's what I was kind of curious with. So I'm glad you went there. Like, what else is under that umbrella? I know that we have an indie station here in Toronto, Indie 88, and I wondered if that fell under that same umbrella, or even you had talked about internet radio. I don't know anything about internet only radio or satellite radio. Can you explain if that plays a role at all?
Yeah, those are all, different, I guess what we would call different formats, but there's so many different types of stations that we deal with. And one thing that we try to let people know is that, like, no two stations that we work with really operate in the same way. They're all, for the most part, they all play by their own rules, and they all kind of have their own programming philosophies and and just structure internally. And like sometimes even the roles aren't the same. You know, like the music director at one station might have the same role as the program director at another
Oh, I
station.
see.
So
Okay,
that's something
interesting.
to keep in mind. It's like there's no uniformity or standardization there. But with so a station like Indie 88 or that type of station, like they kind of fall under the category that I was mentioning earlier of that station, that type of station that isn't necessarily a campus radio station or a college radio station, but it's really good. Their playlists line up with the types of artists that we work with. They're open to receiving new music and submissions from labels and publicists and promoters. So they're the type of station that would make sense for us to reach out to and send music to, because they have, they have a fan base, and they also have a process that's open to allowing independent promoters and artists and labels to get their music heard.
Right.
The same with like Sirius XM. So we send to a couple of different channels on Sirius that are relevant for most of the types of artists that we work with. There's XMU, which is kind of the more, I guess, if you were to think of it as like a college radio channel on Sirius XM.
Yeah.
And then there's a channel called The Loft, which used to have like its own dedicated number on the dial, and I think now The Loft is available online and through the Sirius app. Those are two of the main outlets that play a lot of the artists that we work with. But then there's a lot of other ones that kind of have a maybe a more genre specific sound that we can pitch to. But in general, the types of campaigns that we run, there's kind of three different types that for the most part are what we do. The what I mentioned earlier, the college radio campaign, or the I guess we call it college radio, but again, it's kind of like a blanket term. It's like NACC is the North American College and Community Radio chart. They took the place of CMJ in most people's minds when CMJ went under at the end of 2016, early 2017. NACC kind of took that role of assembling a weekly radio chart that basically compiles the charts from individual charts from stations that are in that world of college, non-commercial, campus, community radio. And their panel is pretty wide in that it includes Sirius XM, even though Sirius XM is for all purposes, like more along the lines of a commercial station.
Right.
Especially the fact that you had to subscribe to it, so
True.
it includes Sirius, it includes KEXP and KCRW and those bigger stations, and then it includes stations that are down to small markets in smaller communities, or stations that operate kind of solely online. So their panel of stations is pretty broad, and that's the main type of campaign that I have been running for years, since I started doing radio promotion. And it's kind of like the base of a lot of what we do is that type of promotion, because those stations are open to playing a lot of newer artists, independently released music. They are for the most part, I would say, kind of more open-minded and willing to give new stuff a shot. Then you kind of get up to the other types of campaigns that we do, that and more so working on running now and in the future, starting to get a little bit more steam behind doing these, what we call non-com campaigns.
Okay.
So non-commercial radio is a format that consists mostly of those like NPR, public radio, and community and independent radio stations. Not all of them are student run, but there are some that are student run. But for the most part, they're going to be ones that have stations that kind of, the ones in the US, for example, have like a listener base that supports the station. So they might be listener funded or member funded, and they are generally a little bit more selective when it comes to which artists they're going to play. They tend to be a little bit pickier when it comes to adding new music, and then also they are not as they're not as like mainstream or commercial as a lot of the like iHeart radio stations.
Right.
So they're this kind of really interesting kind of like middle ground, and they're really, I think, have changed the format of in the playlist at non-com radio. I think it changed a lot over the years. I think it used to kind of be synonymous with Americana music for a while, and that has really shifted over the past few years, where you start to see a lot of artists that do well at college radio are now successful on the non-commercial chart. And
Interesting.
That is, I think, for a few different reasons. I think a lot of those artists and labels have grown and are pushing harder at that format of radio.
Right.
But also, I think the programmers are kind of opening up a little bit with their philosophy, and a lot of the programmers are younger as well, and that's having an influence on that chart.
If labels are paying for someone to plug one of their artists at college radio, if this is something they invest in, how, and we touched on this a little bit, how can they measure their ROI, for lack of a better term? How can a label know if their investment is worthwhile in hiring someone to pitch to college radio, or even them themselves carving out a week to build a college radio campaign? How do you measure that and say, that was successful, that was worth our investment or our time?
That's a really good question, and one that I often try to like concisely answer for people, because there's no real metric. There are metrics, right? We can look at airplay.
Yeah.
You can actually see the number of spins something gets. You can look at a chart position, on NACC. You can look at the like, just today I posted something on Instagram about how some of the records that we're promoting are doing on that NACC chart. It's a nice reference point and a milestone to give somebody, but being number one on the NACC chart doesn't necessarily translate to X amount of sales or streams or YouTube views or ticket sales.
Sure.
It has to, I think, when you look at radio and what you're getting out of it, you have to kind of think about, it's not an easy answer, but it's more of a complete picture that you're trying to get your head wrapped around. So it does have to do with the airplay. And I think the chart positions do help kind of convey that in an easy, quick reference point, to say, like, we're number 9 on the NACC top 200 chart.
Yeah,
week.
right.
I think it at least gives you an idea of, like, relative to other releases, how it's doing. Then you also have to look at the actual, like, engagement that you're getting from stations. I think a lot of times when we're promoting a record that I feel is successful, I'm getting requests from stations for interviews. I'm seeing that they're doing track of the day or song of the day. They want to feature things on their podcasts.
Okay.
It's doing well on the chart. When the band goes on tour, I get guest list requests, interview requests. Those sorts of things, I think, really, in my opinion, help me figure out if something is the difference between something getting, doing well on paper versus doing well in a way that actually makes sense for an artist and that translates to the artist. Because radio is such a kind of nebulous thing, and a lot of people that I work with, even labels that I worked with for years, don't quite, I think, understand sometimes what I'm talking about when I talk about some of these chart positions and things like that. I think they kind of nod their head and say, "Okay, cool, thanks, Shil. Thanks for the update."
Yeah.
And that's definitely happened before, on conference calls where, I'm part of like a team of people on a conference call. The section about where we talk about the radio promotion might last for 30 seconds. Where they say, "Shil's handling radio," and then I say, "Yeah, I'm handling radio," and then they're like, "Okay, great, thanks for the update." So the difference is when an artist goes on tour, for example, and they come back, or if I talk to them, they say like, hey, I was in North Carolina and a few people came up to me after the show and said, we heard you on WKNC, and that's why we came out to the show. We didn't know the show was happening, but they played a song. They talked about your show at the Cat's Cradle that night, and then we came and
Oh,
saw
that's
you.
cool. Yeah.
And so that kind of engagement and interaction, it's so direct and immediate, and has like an impact for the artist right away. And I think the best feeling for me is when somebody texts or emails or calls and says, hey, we're on tour, we're driving through Chicago, and we heard our song on the air.
Oh, nice. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I like
great.
Talk to me a little bit more about that, the X factor, about, having the importance of having a program director or a DJ be into the artist. I never thought of that. That's a really interesting component. There must be some other X factors like that are beneficial for the label and the artist.
You mean in the sense of just like having them kind of engage with
like what
band?
You had mentioned at the very beginning. I had never thought of that. I would have only thought of charting alone, or like you said, somebody listening to the song, Shazamming it, and then going to add it to their library. But it is interesting to have, to potentially earn fans who are at the radio station, that they can do more for you.
Yeah, and I think that is a big part of why a lot of artists these days have become so successful at that format of, like, especially like the non-commercial radio format. You see a lot of artists form these relationships with stations that really like excite the programmers and the DJs at those stations, and they really get a kick out of like having this artist kind of be one of their like friends, right? And kind of coming in and doing special performances, or just maybe playing like a music festival or a conference or something like that they host. And sometimes it might be like a local artist, or an artist from a city teaming up with their local station. But sometimes you see those relationships form even outside of that, where a band just has a good relationship with a specific DJ, and that DJ hosts a show where they say like, come on my show next time you're in Philadelphia, and I'll set you up with an in-studio performance. And
that's cool.
And then that goes up on, that performance then ends up going up on NPR, on the NPR live sessions, and then now you're up on a national platform.
Yeah. No, I guess it's true. Yeah, it's just building relationships, very same as we do at record labels or in any business, And
I think some of the more successful artists are good at that. Like it's not for every artist. I think there's a lot of people who don't necessarily want to engage on that level with stations, or with even with journalists or whatever.
Yeah,
but fair. I do think that when an artist is open to that, it can make a big difference, because you can see that those stations genuinely get excited about having someone who's thrilled by radio. I was thinking about it the other day. There's so many songs about the radio, and I often think like when someone's like recording a song about the radio, if they're thinking about like, oh, Shil's gonna like this one. This is gonna be, this is a slam dunk.
You get a discount from Tiger Bomb. That's funny, because people are writing songs about the radio and hoping that it gets on a Spotify playlist.
Yeah, it's so strange.
When we're talking about the benefits, is college radio, do they have the same requirements with the performing rights organizations that commercial radio does, or do they get exempt from that, or a discount? How does that work?
I don't know if there's a discount. There might be a different rate for college radio and nonprofit radio stations, but not for profit radio. But no, they are the terrestrial radio stations here have to meet those requirements for tracking airplay and paying I think most stations have like some sort of subscription to BMI or an
Right.
organization like that. And I know BMI does audits of stations as well. And a lot of the online stations are tracked through Sound Exchange, and Sound Exchange
Oh,
tracks
okay.
down
Right.
royalty payments
Yep.
for I think online and satellite radio.
Right.
Uh,
Okay.
that was
No,
another thing we talked about earlier. Just one thing to touch on. Like doing more digital promotion, digital only promotion, and not sending out CDs. We're trying to make sure that all of the metadata is present. So that's one thing like I spend more time on these days is tracking down UPCs and ISRC codes and stuff like that from our clients to make sure all of that's present so that when a station receives that, there's not a barrier to making sure that it's tracked properly.
right. And I suppose you can get the songwriter information in there too.
Yeah, we try to include as much of that as possible.
That's a good
Songwriter,
point.
publishing,
Yeah.
publishing, all of that.
Yeah, that's great. So I want to ask you, and feel free to dance around this answer a little bit, because I'm trying to ask you delicately, but I know that our listeners who are record labels of all sizes, but a lot of them are working under very extremely modest budgets. So, and I know that they would want me to ask you what the price range that a label might be looking at when it comes to doing a radio campaign. And again, feel free to give me just the broadest ballpark. I imagine it varies across the board, but for us who are considering it, if we hit a certain level or we have a record we're really excited about, what should we be building into the budget?
So there's Tiger Bomb, and there's a bunch of other radio promotion companies. There's several others that that do a really good job. I definitely don't try to claim that we're the only ones out there and you're the only ones you should hire, because I think there's some of our colleagues who do fantastic work, who have a really great roster and who have really awesome promoters, and we often work alongside them too. That's another thing. Like sometimes labels or artists have a budget that's big enough where they can hire two radio promotion companies.
Wow.
To work side by side. Basically, we're doing the same exact thing. We're pitching the same record to the same stations, but they just want two voices behind it. That's not something you can necessarily do with PR or anything else really, but with radio, we can kind of team up and say like, okay, if we're both talking about this, then we can get a lot of stations to finally just, it might tip them over the edge and say, fine, we'll put this into rotation if both of you are asking about it. With that said, I think that if you were going in to do a college radio campaign, you could expect to pay anywhere between, I don't know the low end of the rates for a lot of companies, but like I know from like my kind of experience and seeing some of the rates that are out there, anywhere from I think on the low side maybe like $1,000 for about a month's worth of PR or radio promotion.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, $1,000 on the kind of like lower end, and then it can go up depending on the length of the campaign.
Okay.
And also which formats of radio you're promoting to. Like if you want to do that non-commercial AAA radio campaign that I was mentioning earlier, a lot of times that's singles oriented. So you're pitching one song, and sometimes that can be $2,000 to pitch one song.
Yeah. So it sounds very much in the same price range as publicists, like between $1,000 and $5,000. Like that's what I've heard from publicists as well.
Yeah, I would think in general radio promotion costs is a little cheaper than PR.
Sure.
But yeah, you're gonna probably end up paying, I would guess, anywhere between $1,000 up to $3,000.
Okay. That's interesting. That's good to know.
Yeah.
What do you recommend? And I'm not going to keep you much longer, but what do you recommend? Well, actually, sorry, going back to that price thing for a second, and I want to get your thoughts. When one of the things is if you're an independent artist, or if you're a label, but especially for independent artists, we're getting spammed all the time with these fly-by-night companies who are potentially predatorial in saying, we'll get your song in front of X amount of radio stations across the globe. I mean, there's got to be a lot of services out there that maybe charge you $250 or $500 that are pretty dangerous. And I was talking with a couple of days ago. I was talking with John from Comedy Minus One, and who spoke really highly of you, by the way. But John Solomon, and I was.
John, okay, yeah.
Yeah, sorry. And I was asking him about this because he was saying at his radio station, oftentimes there might be a envelope that comes in with like 20 or 30 CDs all stuffed in it from the same promoter. So like, can you speak at all to some of these services that are out there that they just seem pretty sketchy from my point of view?
Yeah, there's a couple of things that I warn people about when they come to me, and like for example, like I'm in Athens, Georgia. There's a lot of bands here, and a lot of friends of mine who are looking into starting this process. And whether it's PR, management, labels, there are a lot of people who are going to try to take advantage of artists, and there's a lot of predatory kind of like organization companies out there. And what I always try to let the artists that I know or that I work with or that I'm friends with know is that one, don't jump into making a decision without talking about it with some other people, right? Like just in this town alone, there's me and there's other record labels. There's people who run a vinyl pressing plant and a recording studio, and there's a lot of resources just in this town to say like, if you get approached by a manager or if you get approached by a company that says we can guarantee, especially when it comes to guarantees, and at the point where somebody guarantees something, that's when I say like, just delete that email, right?
Good point. Yeah.
But if somebody approaches you with something and it seems even if it seems reasonable or if it's too good to be true, you can always just email me and say, "Hey, Shil, do you know this company? Are you familiar with this organization?"
Oh, nice.
And I can tell you like, "Oh yeah, they're cool. I like them. I work with them." Or I could say like, "I don't really know who they are, and you might want to be careful."
Yeah.
And one of the best things that I think one of the if I was an artist and I was trying to hire a publicist or a radio promotion company or something like that, the first thing I would do is just see. Go to their site, get on social media, see who they work with and what they're making happen for their artists.
Yeah, that's great.
For PR especially, right? You can go to the publicist's Twitter feed or Facebook page or Instagram, see who they're working with and see what kind of coverage they're getting for their artists. Are you familiar with the publications that are covering their artists?
That's a great
point. Are they the ones that you like and read? And if so, chances are they're probably going to be a pretty legitimate company and you'd be well served by them. If they're working with a lot of artists that you've never heard of, and the coverage they're getting are from publications you've never heard of, is it going to be worth your while? Is that really what you want?
That's great advice.
Same with radio.
Yeah, that's great advice. And I when I was looking at your website, I was thinking, wow, these are artists that sound like my artists, or they, and I think probably the same advice would go for hiring a radio promoter would be to find whoever your favorite artist is, or an artist that you want to model your career after, and find out who they work with, because likely speak the same language.
Yeah, and like on our website, I have all of the artists all the campaigns that we've done are on the website, and you can also see a list of all the artists and labels we've worked with. And like, there's nothing stopping anybody from reaching out to a label and saying like, "Hey, did you work with Tiger Mom? What was your experience?" Or reaching out to an artist and saying, "Did you work with them? What was it like?" And vetting it that way too. I would be happy if the people that approached me did that before they approached me. I think that would be great, because I think that would help make that decision easier for them as well.
That's a great point. I think that when I first asked this question, I said the word predatorial, which I just Googled while you were talking, and that's not a word, which is like a combination Predator and editorial. But maybe it is.
Well, there are definitely some predatorial people out there. Yeah.
Is there a DIY option for, like, let's assume that our listeners can afford you in a couple of years from now. What can they do for their first couple of releases to approach college radio from a DIY perspective?
There is a DIY option that we were offering that was a little bit more reliant on sending out physical CDs, to radio. So basically, I would provide a mailing list and some instructions on when to time things, how to mail stuff out, down to the details of like take the cellophane off the CD,
Right.
put the
I've heard of
sticker,
that.
put the sticker directly on the case, then ship it. Like, so I tried to make sure that we were giving people the process that I would go through if I was sending something out to radio. Now that I'm moving away from doing things, moving towards doing things digitally, we have to rethink how, if we're going to be able to offer DIY campaigns and how that's going to look. But for artists who approach me and say like, hey, I can't really afford you yet, what can you recommend? I usually tell them like, start with kind of concentric circles kind of plan where like you're in Portland, Oregon, reach out to the Portland stations, get their feedback, see if any of them will play it. If a few of them bite and they start playing it, then you can reach out to the stations in Seattle and San Francisco and say like, hey, we're getting played on these stations in Portland. We want to send you our record, see what you think about it.
Yeah.
And that's one approach where I think, and looking at organizations that also offer resources. There's a lot of local resources in different communities where they actually offer assistance for musicians or artists, to kind of help them. Because in a lot of cases, you are your own business, right? And I think there's a lot of, and just here in Athens, we're working on a guide for artists to make sure that they're compensated properly, right? The whole point of the guide is you're an artist, get compensated for your work properly. Here are some things that can help you with that, whether it's knowing just knowing what to expect for selling visual art or knowing what you should get paid when you play a show.
Sure.
Or
That's
collecting BMI performance royalties.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there are some local, I think, organizations, depending on where you live, that can help you with that kind of stuff. But I think there's also lists, that are available out there of stations that, accept new music and or have a kind of a more open exception submission policy.
Cool.
Read the submission policies on the site to make sure you're following the way that they want to get music
Right.
heard. And then stay organized. I think one of the things that is such a simple thing that I do, and it's one of the things that I think you take for granted, is just staying organized, keeping track of who you reach out to, when you reached out to them, and having some system in place of following up with them. If you haven't heard back, say for example, you haven't heard back in 10 days, maybe reach out to them and say, hey, I just wanted to see if you'd had a chance to listen to this. Be nice.
Yeah, right.
Be thankful when somebody does get back to you or when they do listen to it. Thank them and let them know that you really appreciate them doing that. One of the things that really just I can't ever understand is when somebody approaches me, like for example, if they want to hire us or get more information about our services, they might write to me on a Friday at 4:49 p.m. And then by the time I look at my mailbox or in my inbox on Monday, I've gotten like a string of emails from them by Monday morning. They're like, fine, if you don't want to work with me, then just, say so. And,
I've got
like,
those
whoa,
too.
what happened over the weekend that led you to this? I think everybody in the music industry is, I've been doing this for a long time. I know that a lot of people are very overwhelmed and stressed out and doing what they can on a day-to-day basis. And the pandemic has only made that more evident that like,
True.
We need to treat each other better and be more patient with each other and, give people space if they need, some time to review a record or do that. I think that's
So
become more
true.
important for me, and something that I kind of want. I feel like I should expect that from people who are approaching me and wanting to talk about radio promotion too. I want to. I would like that respect of, give me some time, give me some space. I get a lot of submissions,
Yeah.
and
Oh, for sure.
I'm not going to be able to listen to all of them at once. And you have to treat the radio stations the same way. They are overwhelmed. I got an email yesterday from a station. I won't name who it is, but he basically said, like, I've gotten 100 emails, 100 new songs today.
Oh man, that's sad.
And I said, okay, well, let me know what you think of mine. But I mean,
Oh,
I'd
jeez.
let him know, like, of course I understand, and like, take your
Yeah,
time.
yeah. Oh,
But
this just led me to another question, because we talk a lot about lead time on this show, and when do you need, if someone's working with you or someone's pitching to the stations, when do the stations need a record by? And when do you need to have a record before it comes out or before the single's out? How much lead time do you need?
so the lead time for radio can be pretty short.
Okay.
Because we can turn things around pretty quickly. I prefer not to, though. So, like, for example, if you were to come to me and say, "Hey, my record's coming out on on the, what is it, the 19th," I could say, "Okay, well, we can start a radio campaign for you right now." But you're not going to have the benefit of us talking about it for the 2 or 3 or 4 months leading up to the release date, and wrapping our heads around the music, kind of understanding how
Yeah.
we're going to talk about it to stations. That's an important thing, is like us spending time with the music and then being able to talk about it with stations, being able to make reference points, saying like, oh, if you like this artist, you might like this one. So we can do things on a pretty short time crunch, especially now that we're doing things digitally. But I generally like to have at least 1 month of prep time.
Okay.
Um,
Okay, that's good to know.
and And in most cases, I like to be in on the ground floor when it comes to, like I mentioned before, that idea of like the timeline when it's being put together by the publicist and the label management,
Right.
whatever the case may be. When that timeline is being put together and before the album is announced, before the first single has come out, that's ideally when we would like to be involved in the
Sure.
conversation. So I can, on that day that the album is announced and the first single drops, I can also share it on social media. I can send it out to radio stations that week digitally. Like, I can make that kind of stuff happen from the outset,
Yeah.
especially if you're a new artist. If you're a brand new artist who's never done radio before, take advantage of like the full timeline and having us really, hyping up a record for 3, 4 months leading up to your release date.
Yeah. No, that's good. That's a good point. I think this has been really valuable. It's been very valuable for me, and I think our listeners are going to pull a lot from this. It's funny. It's a very traditional format. It's an older part of the music industry, but it's still pretty mysterious, I think, for a lot of us. At least it is for me, the whole idea of college radio. So thank you so much for doing this, and thank you for pulling back the curtain on a lot of this.
You're welcome. Yeah, I really love being involved in radio, and it's yeah, I think part of what you're saying is why too. It is something that just feels really, at the end of the day, it's very one to one and personal, and it's something we talk about a lot. Where a Spotify playlist is helpful, and I use Spotify, and I discover new music through it. But having a DJ that you trust, whose music taste you trust, um, presenting the songs that they really like, that they just discovered, goes a long way. And I
Oh,
think,
sure.
has a, that human, it's like, the human element of what's missing from that Spotify playlist.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. I have, every time we talk about college radio, for some reason, I'm reminded of like one Saved by the Bell episode where there was a radio station in their high school, which I don't know if that's a thing, like high school radio, but, and they like dusted off the microphones and the turntables or something. And it was only in one episode. But for some reason, it's funny to me how, and I know our university radio station here in town is in the basement and it's kind of relegated to the back. But I do have perhaps because of that Saved by the Bell episode, I have a warm spot in my heart for radio.
Yeah, on that same note, there's Beverly Hills 90210. Their high school had the station.
Oh, really?
And I was nerding out. I did a rewatch of Beverly Hills 90210 a few years ago, and there was a KXLU sticker, which is like one of the better college radio stations in Southern California. And there was a KXLU sticker in the studio of the high school station.
Oh, nice.
On the show.
Oh,
and I was like, that's a nice touch.
Yeah.
That's a nice touch that they did. Yeah.
Thanks so much to Shil for being on the program, and thank you all for listening. And again, I just want to thank you for being a part of this community, for telling your friends about the show, for subscribing and for leaving reviews and for emailing and for everything, being a part of the community. It is so much fun. Over 100,000 downloads of this show, celebrating our 3rd year. Thank you, thank you, thank you. It's so much fun, and there's so many more great episodes coming up. The next episode in the interview series is another Industry Insider episode that I know you're going to benefit from. So make sure you check out Tiger Bomb Promo. Follow Shil on Twitter to get some really great insights into the college radio world. And I hope that you found this helpful. Visit our website, otherrecordlabels.com, where you can reach out to me and you can download some of our free resources. Thanks for listening.